Go. Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer, and this is Strange Mosaic, and we have a brand new guest today. I made his acquaintance right at the very, very beginning of pandemic when he asked me to be on his show, and I was just on a show again last week. He is an interesting guy. I think we're going to have an interesting conversation about some esoteric aspects of sports, both sports that we think of as real and those we think of as fake. And in the first hour and then in the second hour, we are going to get into just what the heck is going on right now, hash out the darkness, see if we can find the light and put together a fun conversation here. I did something a little different than I normally do in that I don't, other than my interactions with him and a few little tidbits from our mutual friend, John Brisson, and a few things here and there, I don't actually know that much about our guest. I just feel vibe with him. And so I thought it would actually be more interesting to let the get to know each other conversation really just play out here on the air. So that's what we're going to do. He is the host of the Infinite Fringe on Truth Frequency Radio and also Iconic on Jamie Ike's forum. Your show is called America Unplugged. It's on Iconic, right? It's on Iconic. Billy Ray Valentine, welcome to Strange Mosaic. How you doing, friend?
Hey, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. And it's funny you should mention it, right? Because that's the same exact way I run my show. I never prep. I don't do anything. Somebody's going to come on and I don't know too much about them. We just sit down and talk it out. I feel that makes for a better, better entertainment, better presentation. It's more organic and you can see real feelings come through. And I'm very interested in that. And I think most of the audience is interested in that. I mean, I'm sure your audience is, but I'm talking about mine, I'm looking forward to the conversation. We're going to have fun tonight. Thank you for inviting me. And what's up to your audience? My name is Billy Ray Valentine. Greetings and blessings.
Awesome. Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I was a listener of alternative media for many, many, many years before I ever jumped in. And so for years, most of the people that we were interviewing were people I was very familiar with their work because I used to consume a ton of alternative media.
Right.
But one of the things that happened once I started creating content, I stopped listening to as much content, and it's gotten to the point where I almost listen to nothing now. So now we're into this territory where I'm interested in talking about certain things, but I don't have years of history of listening to a certain other person who talks about it. So oftentimes I'm either just getting familiar with someone's work in the days and weeks before I interview them. Sometimes I listen to something I'm interested in, so I ask. Or the other thing, somebody tells me someone's interesting or whatnot, so I just invite them and we sort of sort it out just on the fly and whatnot. It's kind of fun. It's a different kind of conversation, but I'm really enjoying it. And so I'm excited to really just be off the cuff here with you today. I think that's your style anyway. So
Right. We're going to have fun, man. And it's the same thing with me, exactly the same. Like I same as you, I used to listen to a lot of people before I got into this. And then when you get into it, inevitably you're going to bump into these people and you're going to start talking to them. You're going to form conversations and relationships is what I meant. You're going to form relationships with them and you know about them because you've listened to them 8,000 times. Yeah. But then after a while you stop listening. You stop. And I don't like people tell me the same thing. They're like, I listen to you all the time. And like, eventually you'll stop listening and that's fine. That's fine. Like, I mean, once you get into this, it's like, you're busy doing your own research and you're busy with life and you don't have time to listen to everyone. It's just impossible. Yeah. So I get all that. Everything that you said resonated with me in a big way because it's literally my story. It's just going through you, and my story goes through me. You know what I mean? Like it's the same thing. The parallels are incredible. So
it's another version of we're all one, not the new age version, but So what people don't know about you probably is that you also have a third podcast, which is focused on pro wrestling. And, so that's something that definitely, probably even a lot of people who maybe listen to you on Truth Frequency Radio, they may not even know. I actually think that a lot of my audience, this will be their first time, making your acquaintance and whatnot. So right. You deal in pro wrestling. Can you tell me, first of all, are you a wrestler? How did you get into, you seem to be quite knowledgeable and interested in sports in general, but you do this thing with pro wrestling. How did this come about? What made Billy Ray Valentine an expert on the dark art of pro wrestling?
And I've been watching since I was 4 years old.
Yeah.
My most vivid memories, my happiest memory. Not to say that I had a bad life, because I've had a fantastic freaking life. I'm very grateful for everything that's been given to me. I thank the Lord for it every day, and I don't have much, but still, professional wrestling has been a part of me all my life. So some of my earliest memories involve professional wrestling. Hulk Hogan winning the title. I didn't even watch that match. I just saw a clip of it, and it stayed in my mind. He was my hero, my one and only hero. I've never had another hero other than Hulk Hogan. Like, literally, I was like, oh my God, this guy, I love Hulk Hogan. So I've always watched wrestling, and I used to go to indie shows. That's indie shows, meaning like shows that aren't the WWE, the big guys. We go to the little shows and get familiar with the wrestlers. I mean, it got to a point where I knew what was going to happen. Initially, and this is a good parallel for the world that you and I reside in and the alternative media. We start off asleep, quote unquote, lack of a better term. So I thought it was real. I thought professional wrestling was real. I cried when Hulk Hogan got squashed one day by this guy named Earthquake. I cried, and my mom was like, "It's fake." I'm like, "No, they're gonna kill Hulk Hogan," and I was literally crying. And one day, of course, it's inevitable. You realize that it's predetermined, right? The whole thing. There's a script behind it and everything. I started picking out what happened before it happened. I started mapping out storylines 3 months in advance. It's not hard. It's not like I'm somebody special. You can talk to any professional wrestling mark, and that's a fan, right? They call them marks.
They call them fans marks?
Yeah, it's a derogatory term because back in the day, professional wrestling was a carny thing. And they would put a mark on their back, like an X, be like, this guy's fully into it. You can really take this guy's money. They'd be like, that's a mark over there, and it's evolved over time, and we've kind of owned the term mark, but we are marks in our real lives too. You know what I mean? There's a lot of parallels between professional wrestling and what we really do in life.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you can ask a lot of people and they will be able to map out things too. So I started mapping out everything. I'm like, well, this guy's going to be champion and this is how he's going to do it. And boom, 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 just lining up, right, left and right. And a lot of my friends are professional wrestling fans, and we used to talk and nonsense. I mean, just in the office, in my 20s, I'm sitting there behind the computer. One of my guys comes up, start talking about professional wrestling. One of these days, maybe we should start a podcast, and it took forever to actually do it, but we did. And the reason why I jumped into the podcast of professional wrestling was because I wanted to get ready for something like this. But I wasn't confident enough. I didn't think I could do it, and I didn't know what role I would play. So we all got together to do this pro wrestling podcast. I'm like, if I fuck this up, and I can curse, right? I'm good.
Totally. Yeah. Right. Pre-recorded, so yeah, for sure.
Like, do you not want me to curse or?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm like, I can't. Even if I fuck this up, it's not an issue. It's professional wrestling. Who the hell cares, right? So let's freaking do it. So we bought a mic and we all sat down and looking at each other. And like, who's gonna freaking start? Nobody wanted to do it, so I started, and that's how I started hosting, right? And I hosted a show called the PW Hustle, which we're about to start up again. And, it was me and my two friends, and we were talking, and I'm like, okay, if I screw this up, it doesn't matter. Eventually I want to do a conspiracy show. I don't know if I will. And it took a while to get there. But during my pro wrestling journey, through the PW Hustle, I got noticed by a guy that I knew. He was a friend of mine, but we had lost contact. It was Big Ray Hernandez. He worked for OneWrestling.com. It's a Bill Apter who runs that site to this day. And Bill Apter is like a legendary figure in the sports world, boxing and wrestling. He was a photographer. He took, the Thriller in Manila. He was down there taking photos, and professional wrestling, like a pro wrestling 500, the PWI 500. That was all Bill Apter. And these are legendary things. You wouldn't know about him because, you're not a professional wrestling fan like the rest of us that you know, at this point it's pitiful. But he was the dude, and they told me, you know, to go if I wanted to work for them. I'm like, of course, like hands down. I'm like, let's do it. So I started working with Bill Apter, doing, you know, video reports and writing things and going to different shows. It was fun. We had a fun time. And then I decided that it was time to do this. So, I mean, that's how I got into podcasting in general, but it started off from a love of professional wrestling. And now I do a show actually with Hacker Hamin. That's hackerhamin.podbeam.com. It's called The Wednesday Locker Room. And we talk about professional wrestling to this day. It's really bad. The product is so bad right now. I call it the worst show on television. And I have to freaking cover it. Like literally, like, I'm like, well, how did I get stuck with, couldn't you give me any other freaking show? No, you give me Monday Night Raw, and it's really bad. But it's for a wrestler called Bin Hamin. He's a German guy. Ben Dur is his name, but he has a gimmick of an Arab, 13th in line to the Arab throne. And he talks about 9/11, and he talks about other stuff. He's very hip. He's very smart. He actually has a conspiracy podcast called the Conspiracy Horseman with a couple of other, with 3 other professional wrestlers. Stevie Richards, who was in the WWE for a long time, ECW. He started something called the Blue World Order with a couple of other guys. I can explain that later if you want. And then there's a Big Sal. He's a giant. He's like 8 foot tall or close to it. And the Greek god Papadon. And the Greek god is an indie professional wrestler. And they all got together and started that show. But I'm on their platform, you know, talking about professional wrestling. And sometimes I go on the Conspiracy Horseman and talk in alternative talk. You know, we do that. So I started that. And, you know, that's pretty much how I got involved in it. Professional wrestling has been in my life forever. I've loved it for a long, long time. I'm ready for a divorce, but she won't let me go. I got to cover it, but I can do without it.
Okay, so before I forget, what's the Blue World Order?
So, you know, I mean, let's dive right into it. There was a gimmick. A gimmick is exactly what it sounds like. It's a gimmick. It's something to hook people in, right? A storyline, whatever, or you know, a character, a facet of people's characters. And what they did was Hulk Hogan left the WWE. I was heartbroken. I already knew it was fake, but still, I didn't want him to leave. I was a WWF at the time, WWE guy, because I'm from New York, and there wasn't a lot of wrestling besides the WWF that came on television here, and I didn't have cable, so I was heartbroken that Hulk Hogan was going over to the competitor WCW. They're from the South. Eventually, they got on cable that I had, and I got to see him, but he became a bad guy, right? Because you know, he's historically been a good guy, and everybody loved him, but he became a bad guy, and he had 2 other guys from the WWE with him, that's Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, and they became the New World Order, the NWO. This was in the mid-90s. It was one of the biggest gimmicks in professional wrestling history. And their whole thing was, we're taking over. We're the New World Order, and we're going to take over this entire company. So as a reaction to it, because it got so hot, you know, everybody was into it, and, you know, people loved it. In another promotion, ECW, Stevie Richards was a part of it. And they started mimicking the New World Order gimmick. They just called it the Blue World Order because there was a guy called the Blue Meanie, and he used to do ridiculous crap, and he had blue hair, and that's why they called it the Blue World Order. So it was a spin-off of the New World Order. They would imitate comedically everything that the New World Order would do. You know, like they had different. So that's what the Blue World Order comes from. But just so happens that Stevie Richards is really hip on everything that we talk about, you know, so eventually he would spin off and do the Conspiracy Horseman. So,
all right, so a couple of things. Just to rewind for a second, I just want to ask you a question. You know, we don't have to go into length about this, but then we'll get into some other stuff. Was it harder for you when you realized that the wrestling was fake, or when you realized that our entire world was fake? Which one was the more devastating blow to you?
That's a hell of a freaking question, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I am going to give you an answer that doesn't necessarily fall with the choices you've given me.
Okay.
Okay. So
I can be non-binary. That's fine.
No. So, I was devastated when I found out professional wrestling was fake. I was also devastated when I found out Santa Claus wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I got over it fairly quickly. When I was introduced to the world of the alternative media and I was handed Behold a Pale Horse, I was shocked. Like, whoa. Like I remember bumping into a pole one day. I didn't want to put the book down. I'm walking in the street and I'm reading and pop, I fell right into a pole,
Yeah.
you know, and I was shocked. But the most devastating thing that I've been through as far as a wake-up call, it just happened, you know, and I'm going through it right now, is after COVID. Like it's, whoa, what is going on here? Like everything changed, everything. I had suspicions of certain things and I would look the other way, I guess. But that's my fault, you know, and I own that. But this was undeniable. It's like God grabbed my head and said, hey, take a look. Don't turn away, you know, and that was, and I'm still going through it, Emily. Like it's not like I'm out of it and I know everything now. No, I'm still going through it to this day. This is the biggest awakening I've had, you know. I remember in 2005, that's when I was re-woken up because I put everything down. Behold a Pale Horse, all that other stuff. I put it down. I still had it in the back of my head, but I wasn't actively involved, you know. 2005, my cousin tells me that the World Trade Center official story, the official narrative of 9/11 was nonsense. Now I was there. I was in the city when it happened. You know, I saw the towers collapse in front of my face. You know, my cousin that was down there that told me the information, he was down there too. Because we went to school across the street from the Trade Center. You know, like I spent a lot of time down there. And he tells me, yo, it's all nonsense. And I'm like, nah. You're lying, dude. I'm like, where are you going? Let me know where you're getting this information and I'll go there and I'll chop it up and I'll bring it back to you. And, you know, he told me where he went and that was prisonplanet.com and davidike.com. And that's where I go on and take a look and I'm starting, oh, this is nonsense. I was looking at a documentary called The Great Illusion by George Humphreys. And I was like, this is nonsense. He's not giving any proof or anything. He's just saying. And then I saw an article that he put up on screen. Like it's a screenshot of this article. And it said, BBC 9/11 hijackers alive and well. And that's when I stopped and I put everything down and I started looking it up. And lo and behold, you know, to this day, they don't really know the identities of these people, you know, and I'm like, my God. And that's what changed my parameter in 2005. And I decided, I just had my first baby boy. I just had him. And I'm like, I could sit here and know this information or I can freaking do something about it. I wasn't ready to do this, you know? So I'm like, all right. I printed up a ton of articles, a ton of stuff, mainstream stuff, because I'm like, people aren't going to believe me if it says InfoWars. They don't know what the fuck InfoWars is. Yeah. So I'm going to get BBC. I'm going to get Fox News. I'm going to get NBC. I went out there with a duffel bag full of crap, right? Started handing it out. And I'm like, I was thinking I'm going to change the world, Emily. Literally, I know this sounds stupid as hell, but I'm thinking, oh my God, people are going to subscribe to this. They're going to see this. And whoa, you were right. Complete opposite is what happened. You know, they took the articles, threw them on the floor. They spat at me. They called me names. I wasn't ready for that. That was a wake-up call. I was like, oh my God, what is going on here? Kind of the same thing is happening to me now. Yeah. You know, I'm like, oh my God, like what is going on here? So it's a hell of a process, Emily, man. And to be honest, and I was talking to you off air about this. I don't know. I just don't know. Maybe later on I'll know. But right now I'm lost. So there's
all right. So let's shelve the question of the bigger wake up that you're having during COVID-19 right. For the second hour. And I want to go back to, so I haven't watched a lot of professional wrestling in my life, but I one time years ago watched some video that somebody had put together that showed that professional wrestling had predicted like all the false flags, especially 9/11, all that kind of stuff. And in a very different way, like amongst the real sports, some of that stuff has gone on too, and maybe I'll explain some of that to you after. But you know, they have to do practice runs of their scripts, right? Like, you know, when you were little, you would make like your little model of something, right? Like they always make a small model before they go for the big one and whatnot. And it seems like pro wrestling like was part of like the fake propaganda like build up to things, right? Like it really started like professional wrestling really seemed to come on in like the 80s and 90s, right? And you know, it was almost as if like, you know, just people's running through the idea that something can you know be fake, but people will believe it anyway. And even once they know it's fake, they still want to believe, and so they'll still throw money at it. They'll still be entertained by it and all that kind of stuff. And you know, like I watched this guy's video, and it showed how there was like some Twin Tower symbolism, like in one of the seasons of Stories, and Jesse Ventura was involved in it, and this and that, and the other thing. And I was like, this is just stupid enough to be real. This is just stupid enough for me to believe that like they were like, yeah, you know what? This shit worked really well, like on this pro wrestling thing. And you know what? I think these people are dumb enough now that they're going to buy it. Let's go for it. Right. And so what you're talking about like being able to game things out based on those early experiences you had, even in the indie, even in the small ones that didn't have the super expensive sets and theatrical, you know, whatever kind of stuff. Right. Like, I think that like that is, that's a skill. Right? Like that's a skill. It's like the people who are able to put together a storyboard when they're writing a script. Like, you know what I mean? Like that what the arc of the character will be over the episode, then over the season, and then over the whole show. Right? So you were learning to do that for your own sort of entertainment and whatnot, which is a really different skill than like what I was introduced to with my fascination for gymnastics. Right? I learned like when I was like 10, I could probably have done a better job than all the announcers that they had on television, right? But for me, like that stuff was all really real. Like what I was learning was like how to say these complicated Russian and Romanian names, then how to, you know, explain these complicated skills that are being done, all while making it, you know, sound entertaining over the course of I would pretend that I was talking and whatnot, right?
That's awesome.
Different. Like I was learning how to, you know, sort of accurately like describe and talk about what was being presented as reality. And you were learning about the art of, like, we all love the drama of sports, whatever they are, but you really like, you know, were learning something different that actually serves one incredibly well, you know, for what we're doing here. There's a huge crossover, obviously, between the stories of the characters in worldwide wrestling, pro wrestling, whatever, and what we're seeing today. You know, what we've been seeing since at least the mid 90s in terms of what's played out on the global stage, right? Like in terms of like they've played out some of the scenarios on stage, but also some of the larger than life characters that everybody either loves or hates or whatever. Like we see that now with, you know, media stars. Is Bill Gates a wonderful guy, or is he Dr. Evil? You know, is George Soros like a Nazi collaborator, or is he here to save the shit, right? Like all that kind of stuff. It's a similar thing. There's a huge crossover. Now you're telling me there's even a crossover between the characters involved in pro wrestling, and they have conspiracy podcasts, right? I find that like incredibly interesting. Can you sort of get into that culture a little bit for me? Like, you know, I guess we wouldn't necessarily think of like pro wrestlers as being the sharpest tools in the shed. Right? We would think that they've been, you know, they were chosen for their looks or for their shtick, or to the extent that any of it is real, they've bumped their head a few times or whatnot. But if what you're saying is true, they have a better grip on reality than, you know, our professorial overlords, you know, that dictate policy and whatnot at us. So can you explain that culture to me? Just the connection between those two scenes.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And it's not all of them, but some of them definitely, you know, have a better connection and they know as a result of what they've been through. I'll explain that in a second to all the pro wrestling fans. And I did this by mistake, by the way. Just want to show my shirt.
All right.
New York 316. That's Stone Cold Steve Austin. He came to New York and they sold this shirt and I have to buy it. So it's a Steve Austin shirt.
What day did New York shut down this year? Was it 360 here? It was like 311 or something like that. What day did New York shut down?
I think it was about 3-9 actually.
3-9?
I think so. But
okay.
Wow. That would have been something. No, but there's a reason why some of these professional wrestlers feel the way they feel. They're incredibly paranoid people. Sometimes you can say, because they know they have a better look at a work. A work is, something that isn't real, like to work the fans, to manipulate them emotionally. It's emotional manipulation. That's what professional wrestling is. There's a good guy and a bad guy, and you got to get the mark, right, invested into the storyline. Like, just like you're watching a soap opera or something. And, there's a good guy and a bad guy, and you're emotionally invested in the story. What's up, Emily?
So they're afraid that they don't want to become the mark themselves. They know that this process exists. Is that why they're paranoid?
Well, in part, right? I think you hit on something actually that I really didn't think about it in that way, but they may be very afraid of becoming marks themselves. And they see things, they're like, because they know what a work looks like. They know when what the process is to fool somebody or to sucker somebody into a story, and when they see things, they're like, whoa, something's up there. And the same thing started happening to me just as a fan, because I realized what was going on in professional wrestling. And then I'm like, wait a minute, I think I can map out a couple of these political things. This is going to happen. This is going to happen. And oh shit, it absolutely did. But yeah, there is some bleed over. Like Chris Jericho, I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a huge star, right? Like he's actually crossed over from professional wrestling into the mainstream. He didn't have super mainstream success, but he's had some, and he has a very popular podcast, and he talks about conspiracies all the time.
Okay.
There's this guy named AJ Styles. He may be a flat earther, and he's in the WWE right now. But they in the Conspiracy Horseman themselves, they pride themselves on being workers that can't be worked. So when they see something, they're like, well, you can't work a worker. You can't, fool us, because we know what you're doing, because we do what you do, just on a lower scale. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So something else obvious jumps out at me here. So we have a connection between the pro wrestling and conspiracy or alternative views of reality. Then we also, like, one of the strangest phenomenons of definitely the podcasting generation, but certainly of like the last, obviously like 10 years, but really the last 5 years, right, is this connection between MMA fighting and the sort of quasi-alternative media. That obviously Joe Rogan birthed this kind of thing, but how many MMA fighters do we have now that have podcasts that are offering what I call like the, so, okay, you know how about the intellectual dark web, and how like their ideas aren't really very controversial, but they like to present as if they are, when all they really do is widen the margins on the paper about a centimeter on each side, right? Right. They're just like, wow, they want people to think these ideas are really controversial. So anything more crazy than that is just off the plantation. We can't consider it. It's a psychological operation. I'd say the same thing is being done in the podcasting realm with the people, with your people like Joe Rogan and the various sort of characters that we've been introduced to that are his sort of sidekicks and buddies who all now also have podcasts or YouTube channels or whatever, where they widen the margins, somewhere between a centimeter and an inch, but never go off the paper.
I agree. You put that really well. The way I try to communicate exactly what you said is that there's this box. We all live inside this box, everyone, right? And there's stuff outside of the box, like outside of the box thinking. But a lot of people, I still think we're in the box, even though we venture off, but they're the margins, right? And we're all within the margins within the box. And then, you spread the margin just a little bit, like Joe Rogan, or Alex Jones, I'd venture to say, and a couple of these guys, but they're still playing within the box. They're still playing within the accepted lines. They stretch it out just a little bit. It's like the alternative media light is what Joe Rogan is, Yeah. And I think it's there to reincorporate people into believing in a left-right paradigm, in for lack of a better term. I think it brings people back to the system that was laid out for us, the system that was acceptable, that we should all be playing in. We, I think, around 2015, 2016, we were separating from that, not in a large part, but we were making some strides in disassociating from this type of government, we really didn't have any choices. People were aware, and they were like, this isn't a choice, what you're giving us, and they hated Congress. They hated everybody in politics, record low approval ratings, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
What happened here with a Joe Rogan and with an Alex Jones, and we can keep going, of course, is that they, like you said, present ideas that may seem sensational, and then they go back to their favorite Republican. Typically, I don't think it's their favorite Democrat. They stay away from that, but their favorite Republican, and they stick to that, and they bring everybody else with them. Record downloads, right? Joe Rogan is the biggest podcast in the world, and they do a hell of a job at bringing people in to that. They extended the margin just a little bit, but they keep people in that area, in that same frame that we were supposed to be in the first place.
Joe Rogan's operation, in my opinion, is far more diabolical than what Alex Jones did. Like Alex Jones, what he's doing is like a really, really very clear cut, easy to see sort of, intelligence operation where you herd people into it and whatever. Joe Rogan made conspiracy cool just to turn around and laugh at it and mock at it and then have that be cool. Right. It's a very different, much higher level kind of operation. But there's like some weird things about this, some truths that are all like wound in here. First of all, whatever it is, whether you're looking at pro wrestling and conspiracy or alternative media or MMA and this sort of faux like podcasting sort of halfway truther, but not really kind of realm.
Light, right? Alternative media light.
Why are people thinking that like people who've bumped their heads a lot should be the arbiters of reality? Right? Like it doesn't seem intuitive or logical to think, like a pro wrestler or an MMA fighter or people who like are really into that are the ones who are going to deliver us truth about the world. But in my experience with the people that I've experienced is that 99% of people that I know that either in my reality of the things I deal with were part of like projects like MK Ultra style projects or whatnot, or even just people who are awake. Most of them have had a head or a spinal cord injury, right? So there is this weird thing about like being knocked around that also wakes you up, right? So we have like, we're being fed like some bullshit, but there's some streams of truth in it. And then the other thing is one of the things that's always been a huge problem in the alternative media and the truth community, conspiracies, whatever, is infighting. Right. And so we're looking like we have this situation where we're most people who like this stuff like MMA, they either like MMA or jiu-jitsu or pro wrestling or some kind of martial art or whatever. Right. Like they like fighting. Right. So like this idea of fighting in a box. Right, is kind of inbred into these groups of people. So what the fuck are we looking at here, right? Like it's like this weird kind of thing where we're basically like all sitting around in a pen at war with ourselves and each other, right? Fighting over like, who has more grasp on the truth, right? It's kind of like, it's a pretty interesting setup. What do you think, Billy?
Emily, man, you hit on it, right? And it took me a long, long time to realize this. Okay. Mm-hmm. But you hit on it, and I don't know how long you've been up on this, but you're up on something that most people aren't right now. And it's that this entire thing is a giant work. Mm-hmm. Entire freaking thing. And that's a blow. Really, it's really a blow to somebody that's invested years. And it's not that all of it is wrong, you know what I mean, or anything like that. So I don't want to come off and say that, but it's a giant work. We are at each other's throats for a reason here, and it's the divide, right? And I've always talked about this on my show. Like it was the reason for America Unplugged when Jamie Ike asked me to be on with him. He's like, what do you want to call it? I'm like, I want to call it America Unplugged. He's like, what are you going to do? Well, I want to talk about the left-right paradigm. I want to talk about the technocracy, and I want to talk about the divide. So what do you mean? Well, the divide, we're all being divided. Left and right and left and right. And the alternative media has never been more divided than it is right now. Yeah. And you put it perfectly. Everybody's in this box and there's a competition and they want to be right. People don't want the truth anymore. Mm-hmm. They want to be right. Yeah. That's it. whether it's true or not. It's not about, we called ourselves the truth movement, and we can get into this in the second half more. I don't want to veer away. But what you said there just is really encompassing everything that I am, so they want to reincorporate us into this nonsense, and they want to keep us divided as possible. Mm-hmm. And we're all in this box, and we all, look around, and we want to fight each other, and it's all about what your truth is. Is there a truth? Is there one truth, or is there a ton of different truths? And if there's a ton of different truths, we're never going to get anywhere. I mean, and I know we can take this in a lot of ways. You can ask me any questions so I can try to flesh out what I just said, but we're never going to get anywhere. We're just going to be at each other's throats with different ideas, and people are going to say, I am right. And they just want to be right. They don't want to be truthful. It doesn't matter. Nothing else matters. They just want to be right. It's like a sports game. This is what's going on in society today, or like a professional wrestling match. You take the side of one person, somebody takes the side of the other. Take the side of the Jets or the Giants, the Red Sox or the Yankees. You pick a side. You don't win. Emily doesn't win anything.
Yeah,
I don't win anything. We go there. We buy a freaking $50 fitted hat. I've done this. All right, so I'm not. I have plenty of freaking caps. I wear caps all the time. I'm wearing one right now. They're super expensive, right? So I go buy the freaking hat, right? I spend about $400 to get into Yankee Stadium. Right. It's expensive. I have a family, right? Yeah. It's about $400 to get into Yankee Stadium. And these are decent seats, right? And then we buy hot dogs, and when we buy, juices and waters. I don't drink, but I know a lot of you do. Beer, $8 a pop, $12 a pop.
There ain't no $8 beer in New York. I don't know what you're talking about. But I used to live in New York. In 2003, there was no $8 beer in New York.
That you see that goes to show my ignorance, since I don't drink, but I know they're very expensive. And you spend a ton of money. So we sitting there and we spend a ton of money on their freaking cause, right? And we get up and freaking cheer and do all this stuff, and we go back. Not empty-handed. We have a whole bunch of material stuff that we overpaid for, right? And you get an experience maybe, but we're not directly invested in the result of the game. The Yankees win, that's for the Yankees, for MLB, right? The Red Sox win, it's for the Red Sox, and for MLB, right? MLB is the all-encompassing umbrella of all these teams.
Yeah.
So they win. We don't win anything. We're in the bleachers. We're in the seats, and we pay to see. We pay to view. So we're sitting there looking, and we're having a good time. But this doesn't affect our pockets in any positive way, only in a negative. They're not putting anything back. And it's the same way in society. It's the same way. And we're over here sitting down looking at a presidential election and hoping, we're like, oh, Biden or Trump. Yes. We don't get anything out of this. It's the same thing.
Well, that was I was having this conversation with, I interned with a doctor on Thursdays, and a natural health doctor. And we were talking about this, and I was like, no matter who wins or who you prefer, right? It doesn't actually solve any problems. There's no problem that we have right now that's going to be solved by Donald Trump winning or by Joe Biden winning, right? Maybe depending on which side you're on and what's important to you, some problem or another may be delayed or put off or possibly avoided, but nothing is going to be solved, right? And, and what you were just saying about the ball game and stuff. So our Dodgers just won the World Series. Right? I that's one of the few things my father and I have left in common that we can not argue about. Even still, I only go to the ball game if he pays. That shit's fucking expensive, So you're a good dad for taking your kids, but it's fun. It's nice to sit there and have a good time.
Absolutely.
And whatever. But ultimately, it's sort of meaningless. It's drawn a lot of our attention. As far as multiple truths or just one truth and the truth movement, truthfully, the truth shouldn't need a movement, right? It simply is or it isn't.
Truth, absolutely.
Right? When there's movement behind something, you're having to persuade somebody of something because it's not the truth. right? So we have a Black Lives Matter movement. I'm not saying that Black Lives Matter isn't the truth, but it's an obvious thing. We all already know that Black Lives Matter.
Right,
so
right.
Convince people that is some sort of like fundamental truth that hasn't been realized yet. You have to have movement, right?
Right.
All this kind, right? So like whenever there's like a strong movement behind something, it's like, what the fuck is going on here, right? If it's really true, do you actually need a movement? So I think we were set just by, I don't join any movements at all. I don't join groups. I don't join movements. I affiliate with certain groups of people and whatnot, but you're just waiting to be penned, right? When you're all standing together in a group, right, they just can draw the box around you and then you're all inside of it. And that's essentially, sort of what's happened here. And to your point about like all the fighting and wanting to be right, I've gotten to the place that being right is so uninteresting to me. Like at the point, I would rather, seriously, I've gotten into this place where like, I'm kind of going off even my own map in terms of some of the people that I'm starting to interview, some of the information I'm starting to take in, some of the like rules that I've lifted for myself in terms of like what could possibly be true and whatnot. And it's far more interesting. I think I've gotten farther along in discovering things in the last 6 months since I just kind of really pulled back from like restricting what lines of information I'm allowed to look into because it would go against my overall narrative if I said something that opposed something I was like, fuck all that shit, right? If something in any way is interesting or resonates and it has something that is real, something that matters to it, or something that synchronizes with something else that I know to be true, even if they seem to be opposing at that point, I'm going for it. I don't feel like I don't want to stay in my pen anymore. I'm tired of being in the pen. You know what I mean? Even if I was in like the slightly bigger pen because I thought I had discovered the truth, right?
Yeah.
Like at a certain point, being penned is boring. You know what I mean? And all of these sports take place in some kind of pen, right? On a field, on a court, in a fighting rink, in a cage, in a whatever. I can't think of any sport other than like cross-country skiing or long distance running that isn't like in this defined space and nowhere else.
Man, you're right. I agree with a lot of what you said. You know, and if we take a look at professional wrestling for a second, and how it's known to be fake, right? As far as it's fake. Like I'm not saying that people don't get hurt. There's a lot of athleticism involved. Mm-hmm. These people are incredible athletes, incredible. Next level athletes, they don't get the credit they deserve, but the outcome is fixed. Mm-hmm. The outcome is fixed, and there's this whole storyline to sucker people in, to bring people in and get them invested in what's going on. And just to touch on a little bit of the occult aspects, quote unquote, of professional wrestling, you mentioned 9/11, and there was an angle. Right, a storyline with the Mega Powers back in the 80s. I think it's the mid 80s. The Mega Powers were Hulk Hogan and the Macho Man Randy Savage. I'm sure you're familiar with
Randy Savage. I couldn't remember Randy Savage.
Right, the Macho Man. Great professional wrestlers loved them. Right, so there was that angle, and they were together, right, for the first time. And there were two huge rivals, but they were together for this, and they were building tensions between them because ultimately what they wanted was Macho Man versus Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania. I think it was at Trump Plaza, to be honest.
I think it was. Yeah. I think this was the video I watched. Yes. Okay.
Dope. Yeah. And they were going up against this tag team called the Twin Towers back in the day because they were big guys, right? It was Hakim the African Dream. This was a guy called the One Man Gang before. And they took him and gave him a new gimmick that he was a white African guy. And they called him Hakim the African Dream. He's a big dude. And I think it was Earthquake that was his tag team partner.
I think so.
Don't know. I'll check that out. But they were called the Twin Towers. And there was a tag team match. It was the Twin Towers versus the Mega Powers. It was supposed to be a big deal. And, there's an infamous promo, which is probably the one you saw. And I think Jesse Ventura cut to it, or he was I don't know. I don't think he was interviewing them. It might have been me and Gene, but the Mega Powers just laid out the entire scenario of 9/11
Yeah.
During the freaking promo, they were like, hey, we're gonna destroy the mega power. I mean, we're gonna destroy the Twin Towers. We're gonna demolish them. The whole deal. Like they laid out everything. And in retrospect, you look at it and you're like, what the hell is going on here? Like, do you believe in coincidences? Right? That's what it is. Like, do you believe it or don't you? Because it was so, the foreshadowing was crazy.
Yeah,
it's like go ahead, Emily. I'm sorry.
Like The Simpsons or all those movies we get,
right.
like the movie of not that did the exact story of 9/11. So the sports are just another part of it. I mean, I feel like they test these things. There's a couple of things. They test these things out in a variety of markets, right? So in the entertainment industry, in the sports industries, and things like that. There's novels. Like often we find that there's novels that have the false fake shootings, like some story that's exactly like that, or the COVID-19 kind of thing. I think there was like some Dean Koontz thing at the beginning of COVID.
Right. Yes.
Right. Or the movie Contagion or whatever. So they test it out in a bunch of markets, right? And to see, they use it like in a lot of interesting ways. And I think that was one of them. I want to ask you, have you, how much attention other than going to the Yankees games do you pay to quote unquote sports that are supposedly real?
I've separated myself from them in large part, unfortunately. Okay. I was a huge sports fan.
Yeah.
I still am, but I just don't have freaking time for them anymore. But what I did do a lot was fantasy football, fantasy baseball. I played that, and it's the same thing. Like you have to know. It's like playing the stock market almost. You have to know the players. It makes it so much fun because I am actually invested in the result rather than just saying, oh, my team won, no, I have $500 on this, so let's work it out. So I used to be a huge baseball. I mean, I'm from the Bronx, right? So it's in my veins. I'm a Yankee fan. I will forever be a Yankee fan. It is what it is. I don't go to the stadium very often because I'm not in the business of giving away my money. But, if my kids want to go, I'm like, I bet, let's go, because I want them to have that experience. I had it. So I want them to have it too. It's fun. It's fun. It's a fun thing. So we go. But as far, if the Yankees are doing extremely well, I watch, of course. And the NFL is something I still keep up with because I still do fantasy football with a lot of my friends. I don't do fantasy baseball anymore. I did do fantasy basketball. We'll talk about this off air. Remember, I want to talk to you about basketball. Okay. But we'll talk about that off air. But I still do fantasy football with a lot of people that I don't see. I see them once a year. This year, I didn't see them, of course, because of the COVID lockdowns, but we all get together and draft together. Yeah. So I stay up on the NFL. I watch that because of fantasy. I'm very interested in seeing what people do, and there's money involved. It's fantastic. I have a lot of fun with it. So the NFL, I still watch. I still watch professional wrestling. I don't watch basketball at all anymore. Yeah. I don't watch baseball. I only watch baseball if the Yankees are doing well. Yeah. And I was a big fan of MMA. I haven't seen a lot of that lately, but I'm not ruling that out. I will go back to that soon, I think.
So one of the things that I grew up, I was a gymnast. It was the only sport I was really ever interested in. Like I also liked diving, but that was just kind of like gymnastics into the water.
That's dope though. Yeah. I wish I could do something like that.
So, those aren't sports that get a lot of media attention. Gymnastics has gotten a little bit more like the last 15 or 20 years because the American women have been so successful.
Right.
And there's a whole lot of weird stuff that goes on within gymnastics, but it isn't so much like the being used to program the culture like some of the other sports. So I think that football, basketball, baseball, like these are your primary sports that get a lot of media attention. And I think that like what they're mostly used for, in my opinion, is to push certain cultural messages, like Black Lives Matter kind of stuff now, or whatever it is, right? And also as to advertise to people, right? Because they watch the games. And so there's a stat level of mind control. But if you look at some of what I would consider to be like the secondary sports, and this is something maybe you might enjoy looking into because of the way you understand things from your background in pro wrestling. If you look into some of the secondary sports, and what I'm really thinking of is like tennis and golf. right now, right? You find something a little bit different. I think that when you observe these sports, you're seeing archetypes of these people who are the characters on the main stage of what we're watching play out right now, right? These rivalries that have developed in some of these sports. And if you look into the backgrounds and the arc of the careers of some of these players and some of who they're sponsored by and what they're attached to and who their friends are and what else they're involved in, begin to see like an allegorical or like kind of like the Greek fable kind of story that describes exactly what we're looking at. And you can actually use what's going on in these sports, both on the field or on the court and off, almost as also a way to predict what's going on politically and culturally. Like I had been fascinated for a number of years at like the rivalry between Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal.
Right.
And at that time, Djokovic and Andy Murray trying to really break through that. And I really did a lot of research on them and looked at their lives, and you can see that each one of these is playing like an archetype, like the same way we like
now that you right. I don't know. Sorry to interrupt you, Emily, but I don't want to lose this point. Right. I do love tennis. I haven't watched it actively in a long time. When I was a kid, there was Jimmy Connors, who was about to retire, but he made a run. Michael Chang, Andre Agassi, and a couple of others. I forgot, what's his name? John McEnroe. I met him in an elevator one day. I marked out. I was like, John McEnroe, are you John McEnroe? He's like, yes, I'm John McEnroe. And I was like, can I shake your hand? And he's like, fine. And he shook my hand and kept it going. Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer, and you're talking about the different, identities that they push forth. And I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong. Roger Federer just strikes me as an elitist almost, right? That character, he just gives off confidence and almost a regalness about him. Right. And I don't know too much about Rafael Nadal, but he just looked like a kid, the up and comer or whatever. And then he kind of broke through and they had this big rivalry. What did you see between them? What was your? I'm very interested in knowing this.
So exactly what you said. Like Roger Federer has a very aristocratic feel. He's incredibly graceful. He plays the game sort of like in a way that would almost represent the monarchy to a certain extent. He's from Switzerland, right? And a key component of his game is the taking away of time from the other players. He's sponsored by Rolex, right? And of course, from Switzerland, where the Large Hadron Collider it is said to be ripping holes in the fabric of space and time and controlling this reality and whatnot. But he has this almost like Peter Pan-ness about him, the way he floats around the court. It's very elegant, very graceful. And then Rafael Nadal is from Spain. He's like a bull. He's very, very athletic. It's a grinding game. It's very, very physical. It's very, let me like take the fight to you, right? Yeah. There's no, like he will chase every ball down like it is match point. He plays every point of his entire career like it's match point. He doesn't rest if he's done up a bunch. He doesn't, right? He's just actively engaged in everything, fighting. And then you had, Djokovic, who is from, Serbia. He's from that area of the world that like people like George Soros have been spending most of their careers trying to overthrow and control and all that kind of stuff. Right. And he sort of represents more of like a metaphysical or a new age style of playing. It's like a moving, sort of sacred geometry, chessboard kind of thing. He's everywhere. You can't quite get past him kind of thing. And then at that time you had Andy Murray, who's fallen off a bit based on injuries, but he, also is sort of a grinding game, but incredibly intellectual, like high tennis IQ, right? He's from Scotland. He was in the Dunblane school shooting massacre. And oddly, he looks very much like the royal family, right? He looks almost exactly like he could be one of the brothers. And it's odd. His wife even looks exactly like Prince William's wife, right? And, like he is very, when he's knighted by the Queen of England, and when he first won his first Masters, he went over his first Grand Slam. He won the U.S. Open. He immediately went back and bought the hotel where the Knights Templar were formed in Scotland, right? So like there's all this really interesting stuff. I mean, I've done several shows where I've sort of gone into some of the esoterics of this, and then of course you have Venus and Serena Williams and some other stuff going on with other people. So these are the big stars, and you could definitely find their equal in like legends and like, you know, fables and things like that, right? The people that they're here representing something. But you can also use the game to sort of predict stuff. Like I discovered this one day. I was having that feeling like there was something more important to tennis than it just being a game. And there's this player that I had always been kind of a fan of, the kind of a wacky player, incredibly talented. His name is Ernest Gobis. He's from Latvia.
I'm not familiar.
One of these guys who's never lived up to his talent. But all of a sudden, one day, at the Indian Wells tennis tournament, he goes on a tear. Like, he just is on it and just slaying way bigger players than him. And it's like, what is going on, right? Like, you know, and like just a couple of days, you know, this is a 2-week tournament. And so as tear is beginning to build and he's going on this great run, and he had a great run that season, I start to see stories in the newspaper about the rise of Nazism in Latvia. Right. And you know, he comes from a very elite family in Latvia, and you know, it's kind of an unusual, he has some unusual beliefs about people's places in the world and what they should be doing and whatnot. And he's having his rise at the same time white nationalism is having its rise, like in that country. There's like an energy that flows through some of these sports that is like a microcosm of the larger thing, right? And you can use it to sort of predict. And the same thing, if you watch that thing happen with the 9/11, right? That they basically laid out and predicted 9/11. So something that people, like a lot of people either don't know or didn't understand this parallel. I'm sure you heard about the controversy in gymnastics with the Dr. Larry Nassar, who molested, at this point, it's thousands of girls, right?
Good Lord, no, I don't think I am familiar, but go ahead.
Okay, so this was a major media story the last several years, right? You can look it up. His name is Larry Nassar. But if you watch the way that story developed over the years in the USA gymnastics community and through their governing body, it's exactly looks like they modeled out with USA Gymnastics how they would deal with the Jeffrey Epstein situation in our government. So United States Gymnastics has a small governing body that runs the sport, and the same kind of corruption exists in that exists in our own government. And they literally like had this guy running around for all these years doing all this corrupt shit and not being busted for it, even though people knew it. And then at the end of the day, when everything was found out that this is a huge problem that invades all of gymnastics, really not just this one guy, they basically blamed everything on him and said, well, now that he's been dealt with, now that he's been dealt with, well, there's no problem. And then literally, I said this before the Jeffrey, like they're going to do this same thing with our government. They even tried to replace the head of USA Gymnastics with somebody who used to be in the Congress of the United States, right? Wow. Like there's that big, you know, the people in gymnastics, they're asleep. They're completely don't understand what's going on in the world. And they're wondering why, you know, that US Congress hasn't helped them sort out the pedophilia problem in gymnastics. I'm like, you know, he went to Diane Feinstein for help. I was like, that's hilarious, right? But, you know, they like literally they one-to-one modeled out what would later happen with Jeffrey Epstein. The only thing they did different is that, you know, they offed Jeffrey Epstein and Larry Nassar is sitting in a prison cell. Larry Nassar is by no means the only pedophile in gymnastics, nor is Jeffrey Epstein and his black book, the only pedophilia in our government kind of stuff, right? And there's also something going on in tennis right now. There's actually like a breakaway, like almost like a breakaway civilization happening within tennis, in that in the men's game, Novak Djokovic, who is not Federer and Nadal are like the people who they're very popular with the public and with the sponsors, and they're kind of the traditionalists of tennis. And Djokovic has a different view of things. He didn't buy the coronavirus bullshit. He went ahead and scheduled tournaments and did things anyway. And, you know, he just goes against the world order of tennis. He's starting his own players association, breaking away from the ATP and their player association, right? So it's kind of like, it's almost looked like they're modeling what may be going to happen in our own government. In fact, there's even, and you'll fucking love this, I don't know what you pay attention to, but are you familiar with this whole Unity 2020 thing that Brett Weinstein and all these IDW people tried to float, where they were going to like have like a combined party where they would run like Tulsi Gabbard and Dan Crenshaw, just in case something went wrong with the election.
No, I didn't.
Familiar with this shit? Okay, so now there's a unity movement within tennis, right? There's a unity movement where maybe they're going to bring together like the WTA and the ATP, so the men and the women will be together in an association, right? Just like what the unity is trying to do is like bring together right and left, almost like they're trying to present it like it's like the best ideas of libertarianism and progressivism, but really what it is just Hegelian dialectic, Delphi technique, consensus bullshit, right? So it's, if you watch in these sports, it isn't just what happens on the field, but it's in the culture of the sport and everything else that they're literally modeling out in the same way that back in the 80s they played out in the ring, 9/11. They're doing the same shit.
Oh man, that's super interesting, right? And you said something. It's a microcosm of the rest of the world.
Yep.
Right. Pro wrestling, even though you just laid out a very good argument for other sports, but I believe that the best mockery now, or the best imitation, I should say, of what is going on in the real world is professional wrestling.
Yeah.
You know, and I've said this many times, but professional wrestling is an art form based on deception. That's what it is. Like nowadays, you know, it's a little bit more, it's known that it's fake, but for a long, long time, that wasn't the case. Right. And it's a microcosm for the rest of the world in so many ways. It's the audience remains the audience. We are still the audience. Whatever they're doing in the ring is all show. It's a theater, and it gets your feelings involved. Mm-hmm. And that's what the political spectrum is. You know, when we are still sitting in the seats, but we are willingly suspending our disbelief in order to invest ourselves into this. And that's what we do in professional wrestling. We willingly suspend our disbelief.
Yeah.
If you sit and watch it long enough, patterns are going to show up. Mm-hmm. You're going to see what happens when they want to make somebody a champion. What happens when somebody's on the decline and they don't care about him anymore. Mm-hmm. What happens when they're going to make somebody a bad guy? You see it coming. They have particular things that they use, in particular the tag teams, right? They pair two people together and they give them a run and they make them tag team champions, and eventually one turns on the other.
Yeah.
They lose the belts and then they fight each other. So you know what's going to happen. So like, oh, man, they just made these two tag team. Okay, fine. So they're going to win. They're going to break up. They're going to fight each other. That's what's going to happen. And this guy's going to win. So you know it. And it's step by step. If you take that knowledge and apply it to the political world, you're going to start knowing exactly what's going down. Who's affiliated with who? Why is Mike Pence the vice president of the United States? There's an answer to that. What stable is he with? We have stables in professional wrestling.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. So it's a microcosm of the world that we live in. It's a box within a box, within a box, within a box, or it's like the holographic universe, right? They say everything, right? There's like millions and millions of pieces of the same thing. That's what the hologram is.
Yeah.
It's the same thing here. So if you apply your knowledge of professional wrestling, of watching for years and years and years, good guys, bad guys, you know, white, red versus blue, you know, and you start knowing when they want to give somebody a push. I remember the day that I called that The Rock was going to be the WWE champion. I remember it, you know, he was, just because of what they did, and they turned him, and the crowd got behind him. And I was like, man, they're going to make this guy the champ. They're going to push him, you know, and
we've heard that he's going to run for president someday too. So,
and he's going to.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, but for the reason you're like, I think one of the things that I'm really starting to come to, and I'm going to be exploring this further in my work in the future, is that all things are equal. Mm. There is no real or fake. It is all real and it is all fake, right? And so I'm saying that tennis and gymnastics and all that stuff are actually just as fake as professional wrestling on a certain level, right? The way they build the story is different. It's a little bit different, right? There's, you know, it seems to be more real. It's like the difference between like an action film and a documentary, but they're both here for our entertainment, and they're both manipulating our minds. They're both getting us to believe something that, you know, they're manufacturing consent, right? And the political system, right? Our social, our like society and culture, they're even more fake than the fake sport or the faker sport, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we're getting to the place where like truths can be divined from things that are completely fake, like pro wrestling, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Something that feels as real as protests in the street can be far more staged than anything Hulk Hogan, Jesse the Body Ventura, or The Rock ever would have been.
And you know, let me just get out this point before I forget it, Emily, and then you can keep going. Like you just said it, right? Why are these people protesting in the streets? It's not because of policy. It's not because they found something in what is it, in the political world that's going to affect them. It's all emotion. It's all emotion. They're riding on the street based on emotion, and the answer to that, the is also based on emotion. And it's the same thing that happens in professional wrestling. It's all emotion and manipulation. We are puppets to them, and they manipulate us via the emotion.
Yeah.
That's the biggest takeaway from it, in my opinion.
Yeah. So whatever your thing is, whether it's wrestling or sports or politics or whatever, we are all being manipulated in the same way. And the same lies exist in all of those things, and the same truths can be found. Right? Mm-hmm. They're all equal. And there's no more fake or real for me. I think that we're all just looking at one big shit show of information, and this idea that separation exists between the levels is the biggest deception.
That might be something there. I still look at it, and I say still because I am ready and open to change. Right. I'm ready and open to hear all things out and say, maybe I was wrong about that. Yeah. But I still view it on a layered fashion, like a Russian doll.
Well, maybe it's time to bust the layer cake, right?
I'm with it.
All right. So let's do this. We're going to take a break, and we're going to move over to the Patrons Hour, where we're going to kind of get into some of this quote unquote real life mess that we're experiencing right now. Maybe we can take a trip through some of your experience during this time, and maybe I can guide you to an exit hole and show you that. All right. But before we go, please tell everybody where they can find you and your work.
All right. Emily, thank you, man. I appreciate you having me on your show. It's an honor and a pleasure. And I want to say what's up to your audience, man. Thank you for hanging out and listening. My name is Billy Ray Valentine, and you can find me in many places. You can find me over at Truth Frequency Radio at 7 p.m. Eastern time on Sundays, where I do the Infinite Fringe live. You can find me on Apple Podcast and anywhere else you find podcast. That's actually not true. I'm not on Google. I'm not on Spotify. I'm not on any of that stuff. And I did that by design. So eventually I'll put that out, but you can find me on Apple Podcast, the Infinite Fringe podcast version. I'm on Iconic. That's Jamie Ike's platform, and I do America Unplugged there. That debuts. I mean, it's released on Sundays, so go check that out if you wish.
Sunday's your big day.
Yeah, seriously, like it's all Sunday. Like I have no time to rest anymore. And I do the Wednesday Locker Room. I also do Wednesdays. That's the wrestling show that I do, and we cover Monday Night Raw. I would suggest that you don't listen. And I would suggest that you do not listen, that you do not watch Monday Night Raw unless you're a glutton for punishment, in which case, go right ahead.
Amongst this audience, you might find a few that are going to be willing to go over and listen. I have a lot of gluttons for punishment. They've been listening to me for a long time.
You're so crazy. And the PW Hustle, that'll be up at some point. But that's all I do. I do quite a bit of stuff on top of my regular life. So, but listen, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
All right. So guys can join us at patreon.com/offplanetmedia for the rest of the show. We'll see you there in just a few minutes. Bye.